Has someone asked you a question and it made you feel very uncomfortable to answer? Or has someone asked you the question and you answered it anyway because you felt it was the right thing to do? Now, both cases lacks boundaries, because if someone asks you a question and you don't feel the urge to share with them the correct answer, that is a person who asked you a question but are lacking boundaries. And if you answer the person who asked you this personal question, then you are also lacking boundaries. Now, hear this. All of us have been in both situations. I'll be honest with you. No one's perfect in lacking boundaries or having boundaries or whatever the case may be. But I felt like I needed to talk about this again because built on the times we're in and the people we converse with daily, sometimes we would come across somebody who puts us in that uncomfortable situation. You can't correct somebody who lacks boundaries. You simply can try, but in their mind, they feel they know what's best. Now, let's look at two parts of this, right? If somebody gives an assumption and lacks boundaries about you, like, when are you getting married? Like, the person's already lacking boundaries. When are you? Time's running out. Yet again, lacking boundaries. But if the person you deem okay to answer, then that's okay. But if you feel the person is maybe not close to you and they ask you the personal question, that is a person who's lacking boundaries. Or let's go a little deeper. If you are, say, married and the person says, hey, what's next? And if you don't know the person, lacking boundaries. But there's two ways to look at it. The person who lacks boundaries doesn't know that they lack boundaries. But if you give in to their question, then they never will know that they lack boundaries. So how do you solve that? Firstly, if the person asks you an uncomfortable question and you don't know them and you don't want to answer, you can somehow pretend and move along. Change the topic or do something. Or do what I do. When I come across people who I know, sometimes semi-know them. Like I don't know them as a friend. I may know them as an acquaintance. And they ask me a very uncomfortable question. I change it and I make the question about them instead. So it's like automatically flipping the question back. But they don't know that I've actually mind flipped the question. It's just something that you got to do without the intention of them knowing it. I know it's not sneaky. It's just giving them back a reverse take on what they've just asked you. Now, boundaries could work for family members too. Sometimes we may have come across family members or relatives that have nosy questions to ask about your personal life. And let's be honest, the marriage question that everybody talks about, everybody has been through that with some family member or some relative member. You can answer it, but remember, when you answer it the first time, you are giving them the door to ask you that question again and again. Basically, you're giving them the opportunity to ask you for an update until the day comes that you do get married. But you can change that. You can somehow ask them, you know what? If it matters to you, you'll know, you'll see when that day does come. That kind of like changes it a little bit, where I'm giving you the answer, but not asking you for an opinion. However, if, for example, you do answer and you do entertain someone's question without any boundaries, remember, you are giving them satisfaction in something that maybe they're good at, asking people very important questions that they think is important. But you can do something that I do, right? If I don't know somebody very well and they ask me a question that I feel very uncomfortable to answer, I give them this answer. You ready? I'd be like, well, I don't know you close enough to give you the valid answer that you are looking for. But if you were close enough in my circle, I may have answered it, or you may know the answer. That may sound weird, but especially when it comes to personal questions and you feel uncomfortable to answer, you don't have to give in. You can find a way. It's simple to try, but you got to be aware of the people that are asking you questions that are lacking boundaries. This can also work for social media. I think a lot of people who are on social media lack a lot of boundaries, and they feel like because they are on your social media platform, they can ask you any question they want, but you don't have to answer. You don't have to. It's like when I go live on certain social media platforms, people feel like, hey, you have to answer my question. No, we don't have to, because you don't have to. And you don't have to give an explanation for that, because it's your boundary that you have set with the world. Now, I've covered if people lack boundaries, right? Now let's talk about you setting boundaries. This is the easy one. This is the very fun part of this podcast. If you want to set boundaries with somebody, firstly, you need to identify what you want to share with people and what you don't want to share, and what you want to reveal to people, especially in conversations. Sometimes conversations can lack boundaries just like that. You could be having a simple conversation with a colleague, a friend, and they may talk about something else, and that may lead to you also revealing something about yourself. But you got to ask yourself, what am I revealing? Is it safe enough to put it out there? Am I lacking boundaries or not? See, these are questions that only you know. Now, I've spoken about boundaries from the perspective of people lacking boundaries asking you. And if you are a person that's also lacking boundaries, how do you solve it? Firstly, you need to know that boundaries are so important for peace in our life. It is so important, because if you come across somebody who lacks boundaries and they continuously push, and you know they're not understanding it, then you need to abstain from conversation from that person. I recently have been there where somebody asked me something so personal about the job I do. And I'm a person where I know for a fact a lot of people don't know the ins and out of what I do. But this person is not even a friend, not even an acquaintance, just somebody who I know in passing. And when we had a conversation, this person said something so mean. And I felt like no matter how educated this person may seem to be, they are not smart enough to understand that they are lacking boundaries, asking me this question. And the question they asked me about my personal life was so irrelevant to the conversation we were having with a whole lot of people, because it was like, dude, you shouldn't be asking me this, because firstly, you've judged me and you've assumed this, and you have no boundaries to judge, assume, and even ask. So what I did was, I just screamed the word boundary. He's like, what do you mean boundary? Boundary. He's like, what do you mean boundary? I said, you are lacking boundary. A boundary or boundaries. And he was like, I don't get it. I'm like, dude, imagine if I asked you a personal question about what you do, and I assessed it and I analyzed it and I gave you an opinion. I'd be lacking boundaries. Be like, yeah, that would be. I said, that's what you just did. But in that case, the person got offended. So a person who lacks boundaries will be defensive with it. And you can't change that. You certainly cannot. But what you can do is be aware of the people who lack boundaries with you, find a way to move around it, and be at peace with it. So there's no ins and out from this. So certainly, I'm going to give you some takeaways to recap what I just touched on. I don't do notes on my podcast. I speak from my heart. That's what I believe in doing. So firstly, number one, if somebody asks you something personal and you don't want to answer, you can flip the question back at them, or you can just change the topic completely. If you want to be smart and but more of a statement in your conversation, you can scream the word boundary if the person continues to lack boundaries. And if that doesn't work, maybe abstain from conversation with the person, especially when it gets a bit more in-depth. You can be like civil. Hey, how's it? How are you? But don't get personal. That opens the window for more conversations, and that would mean you being tested on your boundary. Now, your boundaries would mean when you ask somebody a question, and if it involves you revealing something about yourself, ask yourself, is this person safe enough to share this with them? And if it's not, I need to set a boundary with certain people. For example, I do life very differently from people around me. And a lot of people find it very weird. When I say do life differently, my important things in life may be different from some people. And I don't need to explain that to them. I just need to stay in my lane. But some people know the boundary that I don't want to share this with you because I don't feel I have to. It's not about people pleasing in the situation of a boundary. It's about protecting your values and beliefs. That is what boundaries is all about. I wish we learned boundaries as kids growing up, because all of us didn't. As kids, you want to talk, and share everything about everything. But nowadays, as an adult, having boundaries is so important, not only for your mental health, but for how people perceive you as a human being and how you operate daily. So I hope that this podcast was useful to you. Set some boundaries if you don't have some. And people who don't have boundaries that engage with you, maybe now is a good time to assess how you deal with them. If you enjoyed this podcast, let me know in the comments. Hit a like. Remember, my D Word podcast is now in full flow only on YouTube. I've decided not to put it on Spotify or any other place. So make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel so you don't miss the next one. In the next few weeks, I'll be talking about Christmas and the New Year. So make sure you subscribe, click on the bell notification, and you'll never miss the next one. Be good. Have a good one. Setting boundaries in your world.